Thank you. I recognize that this particular topic could actually be an 8-hour workshop. So what I'm going to do is try and give you a upper level view of ways in which you can think about assessment and trying to figure out whether what you invest you're potentially getting back. So in this particular case, as the assessment librarian at Harvard University, you can imagine the scale and scope of an institution like that and all the different dimensions that we must deal with. So even though there's a lot of money and a lot of people at stake, we also want to make sure that what we get out is what we actually want to get out of the library. So we begin with the question, what is the actual return that you want to get on the investment that you make in the library? Does anybody have any thoughts on what return you want to get? More students? So let's actually go through a couple of things. Why do we or should we care about return on investment? You know, we buy the stuff, it goes onto the shelf. We offer reference desk hours. People can come and ask questions. We have professionals on board. We have all these things. Well, we know that we actually want to show value. And obviously ACRL knows that we are trying to show value because they've created a whole report on the value of academic libraries. We also want to show what kind of impact we're having, not just for our students, but for our faculty, our administration, what everybody else thinks about the service that we provide. Are we truly a curricular service, or are we really an administrative service? And we want to show how we're able to make improvements and progress in the services and the systems that we put into place and in the content that we make available. But in addition to that, we want to be able to test whether if we do any intervention, if we make any change in our system or our services, are we actually making progress? Are we actually adding value? Or are we actually having an impact? And of course, we want to be able to change behavior because we want students to be able to take away skills and abilities. We want our faculty to recognize the value of the library, the services that can be available to them, and aid them in their actual research. And we also want to be able to make very solid data-driven decisions. The challenge with data in libraries has always been the fact that most of the data that's been collected have all been vanity metrics. And of course, Harvard University loves its vanity metrics as the largest academic budget. And if you look at Harvard University, if you go through every penny that is spent, we're talking $450 million that we spend to have the lights on, to put a book on the shelf, to do instruction, to do everything. We have over 20 million volumes on our shelves, and those are scattered across 70 different libraries. Do any of these numbers actually mean anything? And do they gain anything other than prestige and envy? And I think in some case, the reality is these numbers are good numbers, but they don't show what we're actually able to achieve, what we've attempted to accomplish, and whether what we do is any better than what anybody else does. So when we think about it, we have to think about, well, what is the investment that we're making? Well, what's the first thing that comes to mind when we think about investment? Money. Money, moolah, greenbacks, cash. But of course, not only are we talking about money, you have to think about whether that money is this fiscal year's money or a previous fiscal year's money. So as everybody knows, the common statement is a restaurant has to be open at least 6 years before it starts to turn a profit. But we often look at our current fiscal year and say, we spent these many dollars, what did we get for it? When in reality, what we're going to get may not be that fiscal year, it might not be the next fiscal year, because the value of subject content may not come to fruition for 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And so therefore you have to think about what is the mission and purpose of your library when you think about whether your financial return is something that is going to happen this fiscal year or 10 fiscal years down the road. Obviously, you're investing time. All those staff hours, all the time of everybody coming into the library, the administrator's time, the faculty's time, all these people are committing time. So the investment that's being made isn't just for the library, but every patron and every person you're seeking to involve or to serve, and even our vendors, their time is a value as well. So you have to think about that too. And of course, you're investing a lot of resources. And those resources can be infrastructure resources, they can be technology resources, they can be material resources. The amount of electricity you expend by keeping the lights on, the number of hours that you're open. But it's also energy and effort. How much energy do you put into a new program? How much energy and effort do you put into a new exhibit? These sorts of things. There's a lot of emotion involved as well. We become very committed and indebted to the projects that we really are committed to. And of course, there's an awful lot of political capital that we have to deal with. If you're a mid-level manager, or if you're a director and you're trying to get the provost or the faculty involved in something, think about how much political capital you're investing to get people involved and connected. And of course, you don't want to waste that political capital, because oftentimes that's much more valuable than the money that you're investing. So what is the return? You have some idea of what the investment that you're making, but now we have to think about what is the real return we want to get. And what is that return with respect to collections, both print and electronic, the services you provide, the space you make available, the technology infrastructure that you put into place, as well as the programs that you have. So oftentimes we think, well, the return is we want more circulation, we want more people coming through the doors, we want more participants in our programs, we want all of these sorts of things. But the question is, when you think about what is the value of the library and the impact, does the number of people walking through the door really matter? Think about how many times you've gone to a store, walked through the door, and then decided, nah, there's nothing here I want, and you walk out. So do you ever see a store put a door counter? They don't. Because they're more concerned is what you bought, how much you paid for it, and whether you come back. Now that said, door counters can be very useful if you have swipe, if you have the ability to get them to swipe. And the reason is because when you think about the potential interventions that you might do, the door swipe actually allows you to look at the activity before an intervention and the activity after an intervention. Because oftentimes what people do is when they count door swipes, they're counting total number of door swipes. I, of course, look at that number, but the other number I look at is how many unique people are now coming in month 2 that's different from that September month. Well, we know in September everybody comes into the library. We have library tours, we have all these events going on, pizza parties, hey, welcome to our university, this is great. But then in month 2, after all the glitz is gone, how many of those people who came in month 1 came back in month 2, and how many people came in month 2 that did not come in month 1. And what happens month after month, and of those new people, are they undergrads, are they grads, are they faculty, things like this. And it's particularly interesting if you do a new exhibit or a new program, and then look and see whether the people who come in are new and different than the people who had come in the months before. By being able to do that, then we can turn around and say, did we specifically target a group? Did we create this program or this exhibit for a particular program, a particular set of students, a particular set of faculty? Now, if they show up, we can sit there and say, oh yeah, I believe that I've never seen this faculty member in here before, but those swipes will tell us whether those faculty members have been in here before. And in our particular case, in many of our collections, we have a swipe to get into the library, and then another swipe to get into the stacks. Now this is particularly interesting because it tells you how many students who come into the library are actually going into the stacks. Now that said, one way in which you can deal with this when you don't have swipe access is there are a lot of companies that do infrared sensors. And they will tell you if somebody's coming or going, whether they're a big person or a little kid. And you can use these as a way to actually track movement and to determine whether, if you have an exhibit, how many people are going to that exhibit. And you can actually determine, based on timestamps and things like that, the actual movement of different people. But you also have to think about whether the definition of return that you want to get truly represents what you actually want to get. So think about technology and electronic resources. How do we normally measure impact on that? Usage statistics. Oh, well, we had X number of people go to this particular database. Well, usage is a completely wrong name. You know nothing as to whether they used it. It is accesses. And as I mentioned before, you can access the store, but never ever use it. You can go on many different web pages, but never actually use it. There's many things that you can do. And so therefore, when you think about defining what the return is you're trying to get, you may have to change that definition in order to be able to say, well, we have X number of people going in. Is there a way in which we can determine how many actual people took content and actually applied it to their work? And so even though we might have a very heavy use, it's going back and tracking bibliographies, assigned content among classes, and aggregating these other things that might stimulate proof that whenever they go in, they're actually using it. And then being able to actually figure out what the ratio of true application is to accesses. And if you're able to figure out and work out those numbers and that data, then you can start saying, is this resource truly valuable? Or is it just glamorized because the name is so well known? And so therefore people are going, but they're really not finding what they want. Or our discovery system is set up to force people to it, but then they're going in and they're not seeing it, and so therefore they want to go to something else. Or the subject headings. And if we know this information and we want to improve our return on investment, we have to then think about what kind of intervention we're going to put into place so that we can move those numbers, which is what we want to do. So how do you actually go about benchmarking the return? So we know what the investment is, we know what the return is that we want to have. We have to then start thinking about, first we need to benchmark that return. How many people buy stuff and then they go, okay, now let's go and see whether people use it. versus saying, well, we know that people are using this other resource. Isn't it logical that they might use this second resource that I might get? So what criteria have you set down that substantiates that you've been successful in getting it? Have you set any minimum thresholds that have to be met? When it comes to the day-to-day use of the library, have you said, we want to do things that brings in at least 500 people into this library a day? Because at least if we can get 500 people into the library a day, then maybe they'll use the resources. We'll be able to talk to them out of the reference desk. We might have deeper conversations, more consultation, things like this. Have you set specific targets? So for a service, so like for our preservation services, we have target range. At the end of each fiscal year, we want to be between this low point and this high point. And if we don't make it, then we have to ask, well, what happened during that year that kept us below? And what sorts of things do we need to do to raise that up? So you can set these targets on anything. What do we need to do to increase the number of people who come to the reference desk? Circulation is going down. How many people put in a program to increase physical content circulation? Everybody says, oh, you know, it's the changing dimensions of what's going on. We're shifting a lot of things to electronic. But the amount of physical print stuff that you may have is still the same. It's still content that you have. So have you thought about putting in a program to gain return on the amount of circulation? Have you established trend lines or made projections? What has happened over the last 10 years? And can you set a projection for not just this next coming fiscal year, but 3 fiscal years down the road? This is where we want to be at. So what kind of intervention do we need to do to change that return? And do you benchmark against other institutions? Harvard loves to compare itself to everybody, because we know everybody's comparing themselves to Harvard, right? So therefore, we spend a lot of time gathering data about other institutions. And the reality is, as we think about this, and we think about various quantitative analyses, we are looking at other institutions and our own historic data. Many, I have worked hard to put together data going back 15, 20 years. Because that data is not just about what's going on in the library, but it also links up to what's going on in the world economically, the number of students coming and going into higher education, all these different things. We've gathered lots of data on other institutions. And we're not just talking big institutions, you know, not just the Yales, the Stanfords, the Cornells, the Columbias, all these people. I've advocated and have included data on small schools. And the reason is because due to our size, we have to do ratio comparisons. If our catalog, if we have 100 catalogers and they're cataloging 50,000 items a year, is that good? Or if we have 2 catalogers and they're cataloging 25,000 items a year, is that better? But we know that a lot of companies already, and a lot of businesses and areas, they do ratio comparisons. Your university or your school, they provide information on student to faculty ratio. Why do they do that? Because it shows how intimate an educational environment they provide. Price to earnings ratio shows exactly, you know, how much what the value of the stock is in comparison to the earnings that's happening. So we recognize that we just can't take ourselves as a static entity. We have to actually look at ratios so that as a big institution, we can bring ourselves down to size to everybody else. We are also conducting time studies. So we're committing a bunch of people to doing one task to see how long it takes them to actually do that task. So that whenever we think about our staffing and making changes, we have a better sense of how long it should actually take. We're also conducting lots of user experience studies We're also doing time-lapse analysis. So we take a lot of ARL data and we plot. It's one thing to look at you and one other institution, but imagine plotting yourself against 135 institutions all at once over the course of 15 years. By being able to do a time-lapse analysis, we can actually see what's happening, us against other people year to year, as it happens. So that when we think about what changes that we want to make to increase our return, we're actually able to see what happens and whether those trend lines and things like that actually change. We're also tracing digital activity. And it's not that we're taking an individual and going, we're going to follow you, we're not the CIA or anything else like that. But what we do recognize is we put a lot of stuff out on social media. We provide a lot of digital content. So therefore, what we're trying to do is as we put something up, some news event, we're then going back through and seeing what path people are going to get to our new content based on the sites that they are coming in from. So Google Analytics provides you with a lot of this kind of data. So by being able to know the path that people are taking to get to our content allows us to then turn around and say, we've made an investment in digitizing this content, time, money, effort, staff. How do we increase our return, which is we want more people to go in and download our content. And so therefore, when we know that if we have a small image and they're pulling up the big image, the chances are what they're seeing is something that they really want. And by being able to know their digital activity, we can then target and change our intervention to encourage more people to use the Twitter path for certain things, the Facebook path for something else, making our own commentary about things on New York Times website by going in and seeing an article that they've written and being able to post and say, our digital archive on this is really good, and then being able to see people jump from the New York Times site to ours is significant. I mean, why should we always make it our channels? Why don't we use all these other communication channels that we might want to use? And of course, we're rethinking all those data definitions that we have. And of course, we're making a point to make sure that any of the surveys we do are actually valid surveys. It's a challenge to do a good survey because most surveys are highly biased. So to make sure that we're not leading people, I was at a car dealership and they said, now that everything is all done, we would like you to do an online survey. Anything less than a 10 makes us feel like we didn't do the job we want to do. So I'm like thinking, okay, now you've guilted me into giving you the best score. Or, they don't give you enough options. We conducted a major study, and the people who I consulted with, they're like, we want to present the data this way. And I'm like, well, that's not right. They're like, no, we feel like being able to say that 98% of our students like or really like this service. And I'm like, well, is it more that really like or they just like? You have to be able to clarify those details. But the presentation of that information becomes a challenge to be able to say what you really want. And of course, we hold focus groups. We also provide a lot of opportunities for people to provide feedback in a lot of different avenues. One way in which we provide ways in which people can provide feedback is we have a anonymous booth so that people can go in and they can just videotape and say what they want about the library. And nobody else is around. They can just go in, close the door, and say what they want. And then we go back and the person's face is smudged out. The technology allows us to do that so that we don't actually see the person. But we're actually able to get a lot of good, useful, honest information. Because one thing you don't want is for a student to come up to the reference desk and you go, oh, you're the person who complained about our reference services. People need to feel like they can say what they want. So what kind of adjustments do you need to make to improve your return on investment? You have to determine what metric you actually want to change. You have to think about what interventions can actually cause a change in your return on investment. And your methodology that you're going to apply actually has to be valid enough that you can turn around and say, what we did is what made the change. Because you don't want to create a new program and then come to find out that a faculty member happened to be teaching a class and he heard about it and said, you all need to go to this, I'm requiring it. So you have to make sure that it's appropriate to provide the data-driven, and you have to make sure that when you think about the data, think about whether you can invalidate the data. Mathematicians are great. They say any theory out there, if you can find one case that invalidates it, it completely throws it out. So when you think about any data point that you have, think about what definition or what context invalidates that data to make it not tell the story that you actually want to tell. So that's a sort of a high-level overview of return on investment and trying to figure out how to benchmark and think about measuring what goes on in a truly honest context and moving away from really vanity numbers or numbers that really don't tell the story or help you make the decisions that you want to make.